Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of What I Learned on my MBA today. It's the end of our second full week, and today I learned a couple of interesting things, less about actual content and more about the changes that an MBA, or particularly the Henley MBA, is having on my life. I'll start with the first change, the most shocking, I suppose. Normally, you're going off for a weekend away, doing that thing that you love, and you would not think of taking anything more serious than a novel and maybe a tablet to watch some videos or whatever on a portable DVD player, that kind of thing. But I'm off down to Farnham for the weekend, doing an archery competition, 2 days, traipsing around in the woods, a 3D competition, brilliant fun. That thing I love more than anything in the world. And what I was thinking was, yeah, clean socks, etc. Of course, I've got to take all these things, bow, arrows, yep, got that. Important thing, make sure I've got my reading. I've got a backpack packed which has my ops and managing people books. I've got just downloaded about 10 files, PDFs onto my iPad, articles I want to read. And the really tragic thing is that not all of those are actually relevant. It's actually just how much I'm enjoying this, because firstly, I've actually downloaded a bunch of what's termed further readings rather than just the essential or core reading. And secondly, while I was getting my further reading for ops, there was Harvard Business Review issue that one of them was in, and while I was finding that article, I realised that there were a few other titles in there that looked very interesting, so I grabbed those as well. Which is a bit sad. It's one of those things where you go, that's not like me, but in a good way, I guess. It should at least mean that this is something that I'm really enjoying and actually want to spend my time reading about. So that's good. Of course, speaking of novels, I've been lent what looks like a very, very interesting novel indeed. So it's about, I believe, Victorian era wizards, which should be good. Similar sort of vein to Neil Gaiman's American Gods, I believe, which I enjoyed very much. So anyway, hopefully that's going to be good, but probably not going to have time to read that this weekend. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that really struck me is, the MBA is all about frameworks and models, and you're learning these frameworks and models and case studies, and you're using the case study to say, how can we use this things to explain what's going on in the case study, to evaluate what's happening and answer a question, which is great. It is really good fun. But what I'm starting to see is that as you learn these models and frameworks and you understand what's going on, you start applying it to other areas. And the area I was thinking of today, using two companies that I'm extremely familiar with, the question became, could a recruitment consultancy operate like an artisan workshop? So the companies involved are a small boutique recruitment consultancy, which will remain nameless, and Border Archery. And Border is a little company in Scotland. They make handcrafted, very traditional bows from exotic hardwoods and such things, and also the most technologically advanced carbon composite recurve bow limbs on the planet. And this is a little shed in the middle of nowhere near Kelso. It's about 100 miles south of Edinburgh. I drove up there in January, and great people, fascinating place, amazing bows. You just walk in and want to buy everything, but I was only allowed to buy one. It's struck by the different ways that the two companies operate, and I was thinking, well, could the recruiters work this same way? It's a very effective method that the bow guys have, and I don't want to go too far into should. Should is a very big question, which covers too much culture and what you really want to achieve. Could, I think, is more relevant for where we are at the moment. So here's the thing. If you look at how the recruitment consultancy operates today, they have what you could consider to be a vertical model. Each individual consultant works on their own. They are responsible for getting a customer, so that you have to first find a customer, someone who needs to hire someone, get the brief from them, so you do all the contract stuff. Then you have to go and do a CV search to find people who might be relevant for the job. You interview them, then you send them over their CVs over to the customer. Customer takes a look and says, yeah, we want to interview these ones. You arrange the interviews, etc., etc. Eventually, the person gets a job, which is great. But here's the thing. That's a very much an individual model where one person has to do every aspect of their workflow. And of course, the thing we've been looking at in ops recently is throughput, cycles, and bottlenecks. And it occurred to me that actually there's a major bottleneck, because the bit of that process that's really difficult is finding those CVs of people who are actually willing to be put forward for jobs at the moment. Not only is that hard in terms of the amount of time it takes, the amount of effort it requires, and frankly, skill in knowing how to find the right people, which is more about knowing where to look. That's actually probably harder than knowing what good looks like. What good looks like is quite secondary, even though it's probably the most critical thing in the end. That's kind of irrelevant if you're not even finding the CVs in the first place. So just the research on the online databases is absolutely critical. But not only is that the hardest and longest stage, it's also extremely time pressured, because particularly in the world of contingency recruiting, which these guys were doing, so you've got two types. You've got contingency, which is as a customer, I go to 10 different agencies and I say, I need these sort of people. I'm going to interview the first, 6, 10 good candidates that I'm sent. So I'm only going to pay the person who's actually gets me the person I hire. Makes sense so far. You've also got retained, which is where instead of doing that, I go to one agency and say, I need this one person, or it might even be several people, different skills, but I'm going to pay you a fee to retain you for a few months exclusively, and also probably you'd have a retainer fee and probably a completion fee. In fact, you can get into some quite complicated payment models with this system. The difference is that it reduces the time pressure, and it does, from a customer's point of view, does tend to mean you get a much better candidate and much more attention from the recruiter. So if you're looking into hiring anyone, I would recommend going down the retained model, but it will be a little bit more expensive, and that's why companies tend to go for contingency. But it's a race to the bottom. Don't go there if you want someone good. So anyway, in this contingency market, the problem is that you have to get the first CVs in, because the customer's going to pick those people. Plus, if we assume that, say, the customer wants 5 great CVs for quite a specialist role, which is typically the case, how many good people are there actually going to be out there who want to work in this particular place? Could be a lot, but it could actually be that, that only maybe be 10, 5, who knows? If you're looking for a particularly specialist role, you might not even find 5 people who actually want to move on at this point. So what that means from a recruiter's perspective is not only you have to get the CV to the customer first, you also need to be the first person to contact the candidate, because then they're being represented by an agency, and if you've got them, then no one else is going to pinch them from you. And so it seems to me that this CV search element is the real bottleneck, if you like, in the process. If you could make that more efficient, you could probably get the whole company running differently. So what I got to thinking was, how could you restructure this process to make it more efficient? And actually, I think you could. But what you'd have to do, you'd need specialists in doing the search. These are people who need to have access to a very, very good database, which obviously you'd try to own as much of that database as you can. They'd have to share it. They'd have to really, really know what's out there. They have to be in constant contact with candidates, and they have to be constantly searching for new candidates. This is critical. It's too late if you're reacting to a search that comes in. Meanwhile, you need to have a sales function, if you like, which is people going out getting that new business. I would posit that this could be your senior director's CEO type of company, partly because I simply cannot see what some of these people are actually doing in a recruitment agency as run today, because they're surprisingly expensive, and really when it comes to the actual recruiting talent, there's not that much to the job. What they need is the gravitas and the slightly bigger picture view that comes with that level of experience to go out and get new customers. That's critical. Plus, having that, you're more likely to be able to convert contingency to retained business, and that's better for everyone. Then, you don't want your candidate people having to look too much outside that. You don't waste their time. You don't want to waste your director's time. They've got to be getting new business. You need a big flow of new business in, because it's not necessarily a reliable business for repeat sales. So what that also means is you need some kind of account manager role. So coming back to that kind of farmers and gatherers, or farmers and hunters model of sales types, your senior people need to be the hunters going out looking for new accounts. Your account managers need to also be farming existing accounts, building up really, really good relationships in that business, going beyond the initial department that you're working with, and really understanding what's needed in order to actually expand your presence in them. So you've got 3 different functions, and the job's going to flow through that. Now, I said, could this be like an artisan workshop? If you look at border bows, what they have is the guy who's cutting and gluing the wooden laminates in the first place. That's just doing the basic shaping, but also making sure that the wood's going to fit nicely together, going to look right. That initial part is also really what gives the finished bow its real strength. So this is an absolutely critical piece of the structure of the whole thing. Then, once that's been shaped, it goes through to the guys who do the actual carving, 2 or 3 people, because this takes a huge amount of time. Carving, sanding, getting everything to that beautiful quality and finish, and really having it perfect. Then it's taken through to the spray room, where the riser, the handle of the bow, will get a very nice varnish finish, and the limbs of the bow also can be sprayed custom colours with border. Everything from a clear varnish over the raw carbon weave, which looks quite stunning, different standard colours, or even entirely custom. They say if you can get them a RAL number, they can mix you up anything you want. To prove that, I was actually shown some shocking candy pink limbs. So what you're looking at is different stations, and each of those stations has its own skill, usually quite an involved skill. Plus you've got the owner of the company, the CEO, who's actually handles most of the actual getting customers, showing people around the workshop, talking to people online, taking the orders, and you've got a couple of people in the back office who will do all the admin side of the business, from shipping to receiving raw materials and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously absolutely critical in that kind of small scale, high intensity manufacturing. Do you know what just occurred to me as well is that what you're looking at is the amount of time that a particular job takes. So it's not just the throughput and bottlenecks, but you're actually looking at how many things can be done simultaneously, which is an interesting way of looking at some stuff. For instance, if you're gluing up the wooden laminates, for instance, quite possibly that has to sit in your area for a long time while the glue cures, but you're only actually maybe spending a small proportion of that time actively working on it. And I think this is where systems like Kanban come from. So Kanban uses little cards. I think Kanban might actually be Japanese for little card or something like that. I'll look that up and get back to you. Little cards, and each, and they do run the business in the sort of way I've described. But the cards, you can have a certain number of cards in each section, and that refers to the number of jobs that can be going on at once. So you're actually managing the flow through in a more intelligent way. And this is used in programming in certain agile systems. I believe Scrum is quite keen on it. So yes, I would say that you could run a recruitment consultancy like an artisan manufacturing workshop. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that should is a bigger question, and should is a bigger question because what this comes down to is actually how people work. And so this is why I find it fascinating that we have operational management and managing people together at the start of the course, because firstly, you could argue that they're quite different, and you could argue that they're very similar, because operations is people, and in managing people you are managing processes. So recruiters, especially the ones I worked with, are funny folk. They were very independently minded, didn't really like working together. They were social in terms of loud. I think they were quite territorial. So I think that the structure that I outlined would be quite hard for them to actually come to terms with, even if it would probably make them more productive and successful in the long run. And you have to think about these things, because if you get something that they simply can't work with, they just won't do it, and that doesn't help anyone. On the other hand, maybe this is a potential market niche, because when I interviewed, I imagined a very different culture to what I actually found. I thought that finding people their dream jobs, really maximising human potential, would be incredibly rewarding. And I've spoken to a few other people since who'd interviewed at recruiting firms thinking it was exactly that, and then they were put off by the fact that the culture really is just sales, 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 targets, targets, bonus, bonus. And so I wonder, if you ran a recruiting company differently, could you get much better recruiters and be much more successful? Isn't that an interesting thought to take into the weekend? I will see you all on Monday. Have a great weekend. Speak to you then. Goodbye.